Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our 8-part home buying series. We are kicking today off with the first most important question you can even ask yourself, which is buying a home right for you? And we're so happy to have our top Triplemint agents. We have Peta Couzens, Elena Smirnova, Lucas Callejas, Gina Ko, and Ben Falchi, who are expert agents and negotiators, and they have helped hundreds of people find beautiful homes for themselves. And they're here to help walk us through this very first foundational phase of the home buying process. So we are going to just jump right in. First of all, good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
Hey. Morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. So happy to
Morning,
have you
everybody.
all. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. So, okay, so we're going to just jump right in, and we have our streams going to LinkedIn, to Facebook, and to YouTube. And so anyone who's tuning in is welcome to ask questions, which we will get to when we can during this live stream. So please feel free to put your questions or comments in the comments section on any of those platforms. Also, our guests today are also streaming to their pages, so their guests can also ask questions in the comments. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to come to Ben and Peta of the Falchi Matthews team here at Triplemint, and we're going to start with the first preliminary question are a number of questions. And that is, what questions should you be asking yourself in order to determine whether it's a good time to buy? So let's kick it off over to you, Peta and Ben.
Well, guys, I think it's worth mentioning firstly that this process is all about relationships. Your relationship with your broker, your real estate attorney, even your mortgage broker, and for your agent, their relationship with you, with the seller's broker, the managing agent, your attorney. So finding the right Sherpa to help you up the mountain should really be goal number one, as that agent will help you find answers to questions that, to be honest, you didn't even think to ask yet. So with that in mind, Peta and I came up with 7 questions that perhaps good silos, good bastions to start with prior to even, commencing this process. So with that in mind, question number 1 that we thought was worthwhile is, what is important to you in a new home? As simple as that. Light, space, views, private outdoor space, proximity to, your local school or park. Whether or not you need an extra bedroom. Peta, what do you think?
I was just going to add on there, the floor plan, like an open plan kitchen, which has been very popular with most of our buyers right now. Is that third bedroom going to be used for a tiny human, or is it a work from home situation? If it's a work from home situation, then perhaps it doesn't need a window to the outside. Whether, if you're going to put a tiny human in there, you might want to give that little baby some light to breathe and grow and all of that. So those types of things, we want to determine before we start going out, just to get a good sense of what is it that you need in your new home and what would be a potential deal breaker. Are there amenities that you require? Like, do you have a pet? Do you want to have a pet run within your building? Or are you okay taking it to a local park? Where are these in a priority sequence that you can present, and we can start working with?
Right. And to that end, it kind of brings us to our next question for yourself, which is, what is on your wish list and what is on your must-have list? These two things are separate lists for a lot of people. We go back to, Peter's example of the couple with the newborn baby. A washer dryer might be a mandatory must-have on that list, but having the in-building dog run that is private for your dog might be a plus. So going through and considering what are really the boxes that have to be ticked for you, and then what are the nice extras that if we could get for you would be a lovely plus.
Yeah, we all want everybody in the West Village to have a garden and doorman for less than $1 million, but is that realistic? right? What are the realistic things that you want that are going to conform with your budget? And then what are, the nice to have? Back to having tiny children, you probably don't want to have, a fifth floor walk up when you're dragging a stroller and everything else up 5 flights of stairs. You definitely want a washer dryer in your apartment if you're sitting on the 5th floor, those types of things. So those are, your must haves versus your wants or your wish list, if you like.
Right. So once you've got those down, I think the next question we thought to pose would be, what neighborhoods are you considering? I think coming into this and being completely blind as to what a neighborhood feels like, perhaps is doing yourself a bit of a disservice. You may have been told by some friends that West Village and Greenwich Village and Chelsea and Soho and Tribeca are the super cool places to live. But have you walked around? Have you checked it out to see if that's your vibe? You might be looking for something that feels a little bit more residentially and doesn't have that hustle and bustle. So, what neighborhoods are you considering? But moreover, have you walked those neighborhoods yet?
Yeah, that's a must. Like, we always ask our clients to go take have a coffee, sit around, people watch. Is this somewhere that you're feeling the groove? Is this where you want to live? Or, maybe it's not, and we move on. But having done that research prior to kind of like hitting the pavements is quite important, because we don't want to waste time in neighborhoods that you do not want to live in.
Exactly.
And that's very personal. So it's hard for us, and we're not going to tell you where we think you should live. It's really something that you should bring to the table.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, if we know where we want to live in terms of neighborhood, the next major consideration is, what type of property are we looking for? And what are we what's the reason behind it? Are you looking for a primary residence? Are you looking for something that's purely investment or a pied-à-terre? Do you even know what the differences are for those? That could be one of your initial questions for your broker is, what are the differences between these types of properties? For example, in a condo, there's a lot more flexibility there for subletting opportunities, for example. Whereas in a co-op, they're going to be a bit more restrictive. They might prevent you from doing even a pied-à-terre, let alone doing straight subletting. So finding out what is the motivation behind you taking on this purchase, I think is, definitely something you should think about before you entertain doing anything.
Yeah, I think you basically covered it all there. I would just add, we have buyers that are looking to use an apartment for maybe 2 or 3 weeks out of a year. So, obviously more of a Peta-terre situation. So then we're kind of focusing our attention on making sure that if we are going with a co-op product, that they are open to a Peta-terre, or we're basically just kind of focusing on more of a condo situation. But, if you're a condo, if you're somebody that wants to invest and just rent it out all the time, condo is really your only option there.
Which kind of takes us to the next question, Peter. What is your end game? Is this purely just a shrewd investment? You don't even need to set foot in the place. It's purely about numbers. You could do this from another country even. Or is this, about making a home for your children? I'll pass this over to Peter on that one, seeing as she's been making a home for her children in the last few weeks over in her place.
Yeah, look, it's good to know whether you're looking at this as a forever home, right? Because you may not be like so fussed with the price point or something else that wouldn't concern you as much. It's more of an emotional purchase. Or if you're looking as an investor, you are looking just purely at the numbers. Like Ben said, you could do this we have a buyer in Dubai that's doing exactly that. He just wants to make sure that the rental income is going to be X, and his ongoing expenses with this particular property fall into this box. That's it. He doesn't even care what it looks like. Mm-hmm. But when you've got kids and you're building a life and a family, yeah, it's got to hit a lot more. It's got to tick a lot more boxes, and it's got to be comfortable. It's got to feel like you're in an environment where your children are safe, where you're in a school district that your children, may attend, those types of things. So it's certainly a different process, and it's a different emotional journey. So important to understand, what your end use is.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I think the last question that we came up with to round this off, and when I say last question, there are a zillion other questions that you could potentially be asking yourself. But if we were going to keep it to 7, the last one that we've chosen is, are you looking for something that is ready to move into, or are you willing to do a little bit of work to it? And again, I think Peta is better versed to discuss this last question, given what she's been doing recently.
Honestly, nothing else I always want to be able to renovate. So I'm always kind of looking at things where I can potentially make money by adding like value through a renovation. But a lot of the buyers have no interest whatsoever in renovating. The process is just too stressful, big headaches, takes too long, costs too much. They don't want to deal with it. So yeah, I mean, what's your threshold? Are you okay living with a certain design in the kitchen that, is already in place and you don't need to change? Or are you someone that wants to knock out a few walls and do kind of a small renovation? Or are you someone like me who just wants to get in there and rip it all out and start all over again with a full gut renovation? Mm-hmm. Totally personal, once again, but important to ask yourself right at the beginning of the process, because not every place is for everyone, and small things we can change quite easily. But if the whole floor plan is wrong, you're looking at a gut reno, and that could be a 12-month process that's quite costly and a huge headache. And maybe it's not for you, but that's very personal.
And by considering this at the very beginning, you assist yourself because you are able to coach your broker on what you're looking for. A $2 million townhouse budget for something that is gut renovated, ready to move into, is not the same as that same budget for something that needs a full gut, and it's about understanding what your buying power is and what you're actually looking for, and being honest with yourself and with your broker once you've made those decisions.
Yeah, these are such important questions to ask yourself. And really, I liked your point about needing to walk the neighborhood, go people watch and enjoy it, because I've gotten advice from people in the past they were like, no, you're not going to like that neighborhood. And they were totally wrong. I actually loved it, or vice versa, so I think it's very important to have your boots on the ground when possible. For some of your international investors, they're not interested, like you said, they never even have to step foot in the place. But if they do, it is very important to look at the home, because you never know what you're going to miss out on. And to look at the neighborhood. So, okay, Ben and Peta, I know, for some people, it's a question of rent versus buy, and they may ask these questions to themselves, but then there are some other important questions that need to be considered to know what makes more sense, because certainly a lot of people want to buy, but it may at some point make more sense to rent for a particular time period. And so, Lucas, you have helped a number of course, so many buyers find their home, answer this question for themselves. What would you say people should consider when it comes to renting versus buying?
Yeah, bro, thanks. Great question. So I tend to approach it as renting versus buying. The decision it's an equation, but it's a very personal one. There's no one size fits all. But if we go through these kind of standard questions, you can, by the end, typically get a sense. Where do I stand on this? I definitely must buy. Maybe it's a good idea. Or for some people, as you said, they're on the other end of the spectrum where it just makes more sense to rent. So there's a little bit of practicality. There's some emotion. There's some numbers. So we'll start with just kind of the more practical piece, especially in New York. Oftentimes, it's people who have been living in the city for a while, and they're now starting to think, okay, I know the city, I like my neighborhood, but I don't want to continue spending so much money on rent. Let's start exploring that. So my first question is, how much time do you have left on your lease? In New York, you really don't want to leave anything less than 6 months to find a home, which I know might sound long for anyone outside New York. But if finding a place takes 2 to 3 months, and assuming that you're financing, going through that process along with board approval, you're looking at another 3 months. So I think 6 months is really kind of the minimum. And oftentimes people start thinking about it closer to the end of their lease, and then we have to kind of figure out creative ways to make it work. So I'd say if you're thinking about something in the next, next 12 months or so, leave yourself at least 6 months, possibly more. But that's the first practical piece: is how much time do we have before your current living situation it needs to change or you need to recommit. The next thing is, I love to ask, what's your 5-year goal? Right. So for example, I had a buyer contact me just a couple of days ago. Him and his wife are moving to New York from the West Coast. And early on in the conversation, I learned they were planning on being here only 2, maybe 3 years. And in their case, it was like, okay, we're going to be here 2 to 3 years. We don't want to spend the 75 to 100 plus K and on renting for those 3 years. Maybe it makes more sense to put a down payment and see if we can make it work. The challenge there, though, and I'll get to this a little bit later, and I think maybe Elena talks about this too. If you're looking at the numbers, you have to pass a certain threshold of down payment before investment really starts to make sense. And then the other thing is, if you're going to blend this, well, I'm going to be here for at least 5 years, but I may want to turn it into investment after. That starts to get a little bit more nuanced with how long are you going to be in what neighborhood it's in, because each neighborhood has a bit of a different threshold where you can sell it and break even. Where, for example, Greenwich Village, you'll have to have a much longer hold than you would in, say, South Harlem or Astoria. Those neighborhoods you can appreciate a little bit faster and sell and get your money back in most likely less than 5 years. Getting into the emotional piece is it's related to the 5-year goals. And actually, I'm going to go back quickly to the goals. A big part of the conversation is your tolerance of investment, right? So if you're, let's say, someone who's wants to invest really aggressively, some people might look at Bitcoin versus real estate and be okay with renting, because you're not going to get, the 10, 30, 100, 1000% return some people are seeing in Bitcoin right now, for example, than you would in real estate. So that also comes into play, just not just where you're going to live, but what are your financial goals in the next 5 years? And maybe we need to involve a financial advisor. But moving on to the emotional piece, the easiest cases are people who say, I'm moving to the Upper East Side, for example, because we have 2 young kids. My parents live there, my wife's parents live there, and we want our kids to grow up really close to them. So they're likely going to be committed to that neighborhood, that building, maybe even that particular property for a very long time. But as I started to talk about earlier with the break even and how long are you committing to a neighborhood, that's just a really personal question that no one can answer for you. Ben mentioned it. A lot of these questions no one can really answer for you. But there is this level of emotional commitment that you need to kind of project out into the future, which is very difficult, but it's a very important piece, right? So that leads me, of course, into so why are you buying? What is the reason that you're looking to buy right now versus renting? What problem are you looking to fix? And I get 3 answers typically on that. The first one we won't spend a lot of time on because it isn't super relevant here, but some people call me and say, I just want an investment. I've even had people who are renters say, I just want to buy an investment property. And again, that down payment amount becomes a really big part of that conversation. So moving on from that, I think the most often thing I hear is we're spending a lot of money on rent. We've been in, FIDI now for 5 years. We're spending $5,000 on a 2-bedroom. Does it make more sense to own something versus continue to spend $60,000 a year on renting? And a lot of what we just discussed ties in. Like, are you going to have a growing family where you need to upgrade in less than 5 years, or do you have those plans? Because that may or may not make this equation make sense. Are you going to be leaving New York in 7 years or less? So all of these things about that kind of mix of investment and creating a home, it becomes very gray, and it's really person by person. The easiest ones, frankly, are people who really just want to put roots down and say, I want to be a part of a community, and they're fed up with the problems of being a renter, whether it's unresponsive management or noisy neighbors, and they want to be in a place where they they feel some camaraderie. They're going to learn to know their neighbors. We see buildings all the time. I know everyone else on the call could attest to this, where especially in co-ops, they do community events. They do trick-or-treating in the building for kids, or Christmas and other holiday events. They do barbecues during the spring and summer and the outdoor space if they have one. So if someone's coming out on their search and saying, I want to build a community, I want to be part of the community, I want to be gardening on the roof with some neighbors, that almost always is a yes, you need to buy. Almost always. And then as I said, the other topics get a little bit more nuanced. This all the practical, all the emotional stuff. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, there's a numerical, kind of a mathematical component of what are you spending on rent, how much do you have to put down, what are you comfortable with giving up in making your carrying costs the same. And I think someone else is going to talk a little bit more about this in a bit. But the numbers make a lot of sense, and there's some really good tools. For example, New York Times has a great buying calculator, and it's very extensive. It asks about your price point. It asks about your down payment. It even asks you to project what, if you don't put a down payment, what the money would be doing outside of real estate. Are you expecting a 5% return in the stock market? Are you expecting a 20% return in some private equity? It even drills it down to factoring in the closing costs, the average appreciation of a property versus the average rental increase. So that would be also a tool I'd recommend someone start playing with, or we would use throughout the conversation. And again, I don't want to get too much into the number pieces, but it is a very important part of the equation. So those are the things I'd start with, or very early in the conversation say, okay, where are you in this equation? Are you a slam dunk buy? Are you a lukewarm buy? Or you are definitely, I should stay renting? And the former two, of course, I think my colleagues here will go into the rest.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is obviously a very personal equation. Thank you so much for walking us through that, because it's not something that anyone can figure out for you. And even if the numbers make sense, it still might not make sense if it's not the right timing for you based on what you're looking for. And so, okay, but for those lucky enough to be ready to buy, then, obviously the next piece is the financial piece, and figuring out the budget is it's a nuanced process. And so very happy to have Elena Smirnova, also known as Supernova, walking us through that process. So Elena, tell us, how can someone determine what their budget is if they decide, okay, I think I am ready to buy and I want to do this?
Sure. Well, budget is one of those buzzwords in real estate that can be very exciting and sometimes a little triggering maybe. So I like to rephrase this question by saying, let's look at your buying power. So I put together just 5 key steps to help determine your buying power. And let me preface first by saying that I'm an agent in New York City, and things may work a little bit differently in your area. Like we have a lot of people in New Jersey and other states. So the first step in New York City, what I have my buyers do is to fill out what we call a REBNY financial statement. And REBNY stands for Real Estate Board of New York. This may be the least exciting step of the process, but upon completing this financial statement, you will be clearly able to see a full breakdown of your net worth and your buying power. So both of those are key aspects of your home purchase. The next step I would say is to look at your assets versus your liabilities. Assets include things like cash in banks, investments, and other assets such as real estate owned, your retirement funds, IRA, 401k, etc. And then compare them with your liabilities. These are things like outstanding mortgages, if you currently own, student loans, car loans, credit cards, debt, etc. The third step is to compare your monthly income with your fixed monthly expenses. Now, here is where it gets interesting. In New York City, you have to find out not just how much your down payment is going to be in order to determine your price point, but also the amount of fixed monthly building expenses you're comfortable paying. And these include real estate taxes and building maintenance fees. In other states, people call these HOA fees. In New York, we either call these common charges and taxes if it's a condo, or maintenance fees if it's a co-op. So in co-op, both the common charges and the taxes are lumped into one sum, which we call the maintenance. Now, the fourth step, I would say, is to determine your down payment amount and the percentage of financing. So most buildings in New York City require 20 to 25% down payment. Your cash in banks and investments in stocks and bonds are considered your liquid assets. So check your financial statement, look at your liquid assets, see how much you are comfortable putting down, knowing that you have a cushion of money saved for closing costs and your projected monthly expenses. Keep in mind that in a co-op, the board will typically look for 1 to 2 years of your mortgage and maintenance liquid in post-closing. And the last step, step number 5, is to determine your projected monthly expenses. So your income should be roughly 4 times your expenses, or in other words, you should have a 25% debt to income ratio. Now, this is a bit lower than what most banks ask for when you apply for a mortgage, but this is the standard amount for co-ops in New York City. What goes into your projected monthly expenses, you may think? So your projected monthly mortgage payment, then your maintenance and real estate taxes on the property you're going to be buying, plus any of your current fixed monthly expenses. So upon doing these things, I think you'll be able to really pinpoint what your buying power is. As you know, Lucas pointed out, it can also vary your motivation for buying. If you're buying for investment, you may need to be putting more percent down. You may be wanting to look for lower carrying costs in that building. So these are the 5 steps I would recommend you do.
Okay, thank you so much, Elena. Yes, and I mean, that's a hefty task to do all of that financial stuff. I would be a little intimidated by that. So obviously, it's very important to have a real estate agent who knows what they're doing, who knows the nuance, particularly the New York City market, because buying in New York City is not like buying anywhere else in the world.
Right.
Or I should say in the United States. I can't speak for the rest of the world. But yes, so that in itself is very important. And so thank you so much. So then, okay, let's say you've got your finances down and now it's time to start shopping, which that is the best part. So then let's talk about the buying timeline. And so Gina Ko, the lead of the Ko team, is here to walk us through what you need to think about and how long you can expect it to take. Lucas said, minimum 6 months, and that's, I think, a pretty good framework. Gina, how would you tell us to think about the buying timeline?
Morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I might be high energy because I love talking about this and I could talk about this all day long. And I will be using my hands a lot because I have an Italian name. So just want to talk about how we look at timeline. Timeline is something that, we discuss with our clients on the sell and the buy side often. We want to make sure that you understand expectations. We have clients on our team, we have clients all over the country. So we see timelines very different than what you would see in New York City. Our tri-state area offices vary in terms of what the timeline looks like. So we have to look at this from various perspectives. In terms of your timeline, your overall timeline to purchase, it is a wide range. And it can be determined by 3 factors. And so just from kind of want to start speaking about the timeline from when you go into contract to when you close, because I think that will be more helpful because it can take someone 6 to 12 months, maybe 2 or 3 years to prepare financially to actually start looking for a property. And it can take anywhere from 1 day. I've had many buyers find their home within 1 day or sell a property within 1 day. It can take 1 day to 6 to 9 months, sometimes even 12 months to, find that property for yourself. So that particular part of the timeline is in conjunction with what everyone else has said, how prepared you are, how much work you do in advance or forward, facing, instead of kind of doing it as you move along. So as prepared as you are, let's say you are extremely efficient, very active, and very, determined to find a property. Let's say it could take you about, usually I would see 45 days is the average that we see our buyers go into contract. But this market is a little different. So let's forget COVID for a few minutes, if possible. When we look at COVID, we'll discuss COVID a little bit differently. But when we look at a timeline, I would say that your timeline, depending on a few factors, could be 2 to 6 months from contract to closing, depending on on a few factors. So 3 factors that we discuss are what you're buying, how you're buying, and who is involved. And we'll go over what you're buying first, and let's discuss. And Elena made a good point. We are focused in New York City directly. However, we can support clients throughout the country, and we can talk to you more about that offline. In terms of what you're buying, there are different kinds of properties you can buy in New York City. There are apartments and townhouses or houses or multifamilies. So when you're looking at those 2 different products or those 2 different kinds of properties, the timeline can vary. When you're purchasing a townhouse or a house or multifamily, it tends to be on the quicker side of a transaction. I do see our transactions happening. I do see our transactions on the townhouse and multifamily front, usually around the 2 to 4 month period when it is from contract to close. And when we look at apartments, it can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on a number of factors. And we'll discuss that in a moment. And then let's see, when we talk about, how you're purchasing the property, again, there are many factors that we look into. One of them is if you're purchasing all cash. We have plenty of people who are purchasing all cash. And so those transactions tend to go, a little quicker. I would say they could shave off maybe about 2 to 3 months, depending on how someone is financing. And this particular, not everyone I know can buy all cash. And so we do see a majority of our clients purchasing with mortgages or what we call a finance transaction. Those transactions can take longer, whether it's a townhouse or an apartment. And that particular reason is if you're purchasing in an apartment, let's say, there is a banking process plus a building process. And the building process includes 2 components, the building management and the board process. So those 3 components, while ideally you can overlay them and have them happen simultaneously, minimum, they would probably take anywhere from minimum 4 to 6 weeks in the transaction. So that's why we often say that you want to give yourself a good 3 to 6 months in terms of knowing that you will be closing out. And to Lucas's point, when you're trying to look at your lease or understanding when you're going to start looking for a property, we're happy to help you if you just signed your lease. It's never a bad time to start looking and preparing yourself to purchase. We just have to be mindful of the other side of how you're going to leave your previous home. Okay, and so there's another factor that we want to consider when we look at, the timeline. This particular timeline is, how would I say, less. It's a little more fluid. This particular part of the timeline is dependent on who is involved. Now, in our business, we deal a lot with estate sales. We deal a lot with sponsor sales, new developments. There's a wide range of types of properties that you're going to be looking at. And maybe this will be your deciding factor, not only with your budget and the neighborhood, but one of the quickest ways to purchase into a property would be, a sponsor unit in an existing building where you don't have a board, where you don't have building and board processes. So that tends to eliminate some of your timeline. And then, when you look at an estate sale, let me say estate sales can go either way. So it depends on who's involved. If you have, one administrator where there's no other family members, or that administrator is very firm that they're making the decisions, that can go very smoothly. However, we've seen estate sales, whether it's $100,000 or $5 to $10 million, if there are 5 to 10 family members who want to be involved in decision making or who are adamant about being involved, even though there's one administrator, that can change the timeline, of decision making and how the process moves along. So all of these are factors in how you want to manage your expectations in the timeline of purchasing. I would say that, I usually tell buyers who are fresh to the transaction, who haven't even gotten their pre-approval, or we haven't even pulled together their real estate team, to give themselves a minimum of 6 to 9 months, if not 12 months, depending on what they're looking for and how they're looking. Because, we have clients right now in Europe and Asia looking at properties sight unseen. They're not here. And so we have to be mindful of time differences and all of these factors too. So right now we have a transaction where clients are in Europe, owners are in California, and we're here. So that also can affect your timeline.
Okay.
So that's, just a lot of things that you want to be mindful of when you're deciding on what's the best path to go.
Okay. Very, very helpful. And what are you all seeing? So for somebody who's viewing, who may be thinking about getting into the market right now, tell us, how is the market right now for buyers?
The market is, it's very busy. Frankly, one of the most common questions we probably all get asked is like, what's the COVID discount? And, the bad news is COVID discount is gone. The good news, though, is that we're still well below 2015 and 2016 peak prices. So if you're coming in for a medium to long-term timeline of holding the property and living in it, or for an investment, there's still a lot of upside to be had, almost maybe just everywhere in the 5 boroughs, but definitely in Manhattan.
Right. And buyers are definitely becoming more active, especially before Labor Day, for sure. And then after Labor Day, there's still definitely a lot of interest. I think we're getting a contract in a week at least, if not a few contracts in a week on our team. And so things are definitely moving ahead. And this is, we are probably listing 3 to 5 properties in the next few weeks. So there is definitely a lot of activity. In Manhattan and Queens is where we mostly focus. And in Brooklyn, we have a few things happening, and we can see how buyers are actively and proactively.
And
I'm so sorry, Elena, I want to come to you, but Gina, I just missed the last part of what you said.
Oh, I was just saying that, we mostly have a lot of listings in Manhattan and Queens, and we see a lot of engagement, and there's a lot of buyers that are engaging, as well as some of the activity that we're seeing in Brooklyn. There just seems to be a healthy amount of activity throughout the boroughs, as well as different neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. Elena, what were you saying?
So for me, and I've been in the industry almost 10 years, this has been by far the busiest year for my buyers. I've had so many people from out of the country, from all areas, South America, Europe, Asia. I've done a handful of deals fully virtually. So people are getting comfortable with virtual tours. I make sure to give them FaceTime tours of the entire apartment. Go through each thing step by step. I had a buyer last weekend come from Colombia, And he's an investor. He's like, I have some money. I'd like to, park it here in New York City. Let's find an investment property. So he's like, tell me what neighborhoods, So I took him basically all over. I showed him a few options in each neighborhood: Upper East, Upper West, Midtown, downtown. And he originally was against Financial District, but he hadn't been there. In fact, we saw how it's changed drastically. So it's now a much more residential neighborhood. And we actually found a very great deal there for him with an outdoor space. So he's extremely happy. It's already got a tenant in place. So that's what I'm seeing. And the other big influx of clients, I would say, is people who came in during COVID and got like a rental property that had 2, 3, 4 months free on their lease. And it was like 2-bedroom on average, with those incentives is around 4,000 to 5,000. And that incentive is going to end, at the end of this year. It's going to jump up to the gross price, which is 7,000 or 8,000, right, for a luxury 2-bedroom. So they're like, well, we would rather put that into a purchase. So they're looking for $2 million property to buy, because they might as well be, building equity, the appreciation aspect, and actually pay less in their monthly than they are in rent. So that's been my experience. And it's been actually very quick. On average, I have people come out to see places 2 or 3 times, whether that's over the course of weeks or days. We line up 5 properties per day to see. And those are after like going back and forth by email. We narrow it down to 10 to 15 places. So by the time we've seen all of them, they're really ready to make a decision.
Okay. Susanna, I was just going to add, if you are, Ben and I are working with a lot of buyers right now, and we're seeing so many things go to best and final. So I think this kind of seminar has been quite timely. It's a really important message to get across, that you really have to have all your ducks in a row, because the market is competitive. If you want something, you got to get in the game. You got to get all your paperwork ready and be ready to make moves.
I mean, if this says anything at all, like Lucas and I our new development in Astoria, our first open house was March 8th of last year, right before the shutdown. And while we were getting and put contracts for things that where people made offers sight unseen, we have been at a steady pace for this year. And it says a lot for a new development to be at this steady pace where we're putting something into contract almost every other week. We're down to our last property now. And so that, that says a lot considering the past year.
I know developers are happy with this market because they were sitting on an ugly market for a few years there. So yeah. I'm sure they're very excited about this.
Ben, I'm sorry, Ben, I might have interrupted.
No, I was just going to say, I was just going to add on to what all of you guys have said about it being quite competitive out there, about a lot of best and finals happening. If you are in the market for a townhouse in Brooklyn right now, you better get prepared, because there's a lot of people who are also doing the same thing, and there is not that much product out there. So we were really hoping for a nice influx after Labor Day, as we've all been talking about. And certainly, while we have seen a return of new product to the market since Labor Day, it hasn't been as huge as I was hoping it would be, and the buyers still keep coming. So if I was a new first-time home buyer right now, my number one thing would be get my ducks in a row, because as Gina mentioned, it could be day one. You could literally find the right apartment on your first day of searching. So being prepared to be able to move forward and move forward in a meaningful way is important, especially in a market right now, like this right now.
If I can add also, speaking of like day one, I usually, we prepare our clients so that they're ready to make offers on day one. And so that's what we want. We want the real estate team to be formed. We want all the paperwork to be ready. I encourage all of my buyers to make an offer on day one, whether or not they really they really are in love with the property. For me, it's more about, interviewing for a job, and you don't interview for your dream job on day one. So really just trying to understand the market with direct feedback from sellers has been really helpful for our buyers, so that when the next one comes, whether it's on day one also or the next week, they really understand what they want and what they need and what kind of feedback they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And Elena mentioned earlier, it's all about buying power at the end of the day. And sometimes the forming of your real estate team and those early conversations with your mortgage broker and filling out that REBNY form is what gives you that understanding of what your buying power is. You might not really understand what your down payment needs to be relative to your ongoing monthlies until you take a look at your own finances in these ways. So yeah, I think it's important.
So true. And so this is an 8-part. This is an 8-part. Are you hearing that noise too?
Yes. You're an alien, and you.
This market makes a monster out of me. No, this is an 8-part home buying series. And the next one, which is Wednesday of next week at 11 a.m., we're talking exactly about that. How to prepare the home buying foundation. Why work with a real estate agent? What you need to get for a real estate attorney, mortgage professional. All of that getting pre-approved, to your point about coming to day one ready, because I think some people think, oh, I just want to shop, I want to browse, can't you just show me around? But this is not the market for browsing, because you're going to get hit with a rude awakening of, you're going to fall in love with a property, and if you're unprepared for it, you're going to really feel badly about that. And so join us for every step of this 8-part home buying process to really learn about the intricacies of buying and how to prepare so that you can be ready. Like we said, this could be a long process. It could be easy, it could be quick, and if you're lucky and you can be the highest bidder in some cases, then great, kudos.
You don't always have to be the highest bidder. You just have to be the best bidder.
That's true. That's very true. Good point. Thank you for that reminder. And that, again, brings us back to the importance of working with a really experienced agent who knows this nuanced market. And not only agent, but an attorney and a mortgage professional who knows this particular nuanced market. You can't get somebody from, another town or another state to represent you as a real estate attorney, for example. So first of all, if anyone who's viewing is interested in buying, wants to know more about this process, wants to understand the nuances of it a little bit more, then I encourage all of you to reach out to any of our panelists today, Peta, Ben, Elena, Gina, Lucas. They're incredible. They're wonderful. You're going to love working with them. You can also reach out to Triplemint at hello@triplemint.com for more information. I think you'll love working with them. And please do, wishing you all the best if you are looking to buy, such an exciting time. And I want to thank you all again for being with us. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you all have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great day.